Good morning. 1, 2, 3, 4. Will you stand and join us? Ooh, I've been stacking up the years I spent trading punches with the enemy. Ooh, build myself a double stick, stone tower lies higher than the eye can see. Trapped in my flesh and bone, crying out to you, Lord, desperate. Oh, come out of this cage and set me free. All of my fears, Jericho walls gonna come down, come down. All of my fears, Jericho walls gonna come down, come down. Oh Lord, my prison turns to ruin when your love moves it. All of my fears, Jericho walls gonna come down, come down, come down. Ooh, the truth is crashing through the pride and the blame, cutting straight through the heart of me. Ooh, long before I ever called your name, you were fighting for my victory. Carved in your flesh and bones, the wounds that have set my soul's forgiven. Now I can feel the darkness trembling. All of my fears, Jericho walls gonna come down, come down. All of my fears, Jericho walls gonna come down, come down. Oh Lord, my prison turns to ruin when your love moves it. All of my fears, Jericho walls gonna come down, come down, come down. Rebuild me from the ground up. All I wanna see is you. Terrify the lies with truth. Oh, all of my fears, Jericho walls gonna come down, come down. All of my fears, Jericho walls gonna come down, come down. Oh Lord, my prison turns to ruin when your love moves it. All of my fears, Jericho walls gonna come down, come down, come down. All of my fears are gonna come down. Jericho walls gonna come down, come down, come down. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's lift him up today.
Breaks the power of sin and darkness, whose love is mighty and so much stronger. The King of glory, the King above all kings, who shakes the earth with holy thunder, who leaves us breathless in awe and wonder. The King of glory, the King above all kings. This is amazing grace. conquered the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain. Worthy, worthy, worthy. Oh, this is amazing grace. This is unfailing love. That you would take my place. That you would bear my cross. You laid down your life. That I would be set free. Jesus, I sing you, Lord, all that you've done for me. All that you've done for me. All throughout my history, faithfulness has walked beside me. When storms made way for spring, every season from where I'm standing, I see the evidence of your goodness all over my life, all over my life. I see your promises in fulfillment all over my life, all over my life. Help me remember when I'm weak. The evidence is here.
May be seated, please. Nice job, guys. Thanks, Terry. Hey, welcome to Union Christian Church, and our mission here is to connect you to Jesus, which that's a big surprise, right? Yeah, that a church would want to connect you with Jesus, but that's what we're here for, and we're excited that you have decided to join us on this first Sunday of 2021. And you know, it's hard to believe that 2020 is in the past, right? Yeah, that's what I got. That's what I got first service. Everybody was like, "Yeah, let's have a party." A lot changed in the world between March 1st, 2020, and December 31st in 2020, right? I mean, the first 2 months started out pretty good, right? We were pretty solid, and then all of a sudden we started hearing about COVID, and so many things changed. And my guess is a lot of you are feeling a bit anxious about what 2021 will bring for not only you and your family, but for the future of our country and the world that we live in. Some of us, if we're honest, are worried and concerned and are looking for a new chapter in our lives. And that's why this morning we're launching a new series, 4-week series entitled Anxious for Nothing. And I think this series can be helpful for all of us in the midst of these times that have been uncertain. But I also believe that this series will be really helpful for those who deal with anxiety on a regular basis. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of anxious about this series myself. I know what the stakes are in your life and the lives of the people that you love. So about 3 times a year, if I'm lucky, I get to go play golf with a group of friends of mine who are all pastors in different churches. Now, we all have different roles in that. I'm the lead pastor here at Union. Another guy is a connections pastor. There's another guy who is a worship/youth pastor. And the last guy was a youth pastor. He just this past year became a elementary school teacher. But we've been friends for going on, 10 plus years. And we get together and we talk about life. Because to be honest, none of us are very good at golf, right? I mean, we laugh, and sometimes we pray together, especially when I'm getting ready to tee off. That's just how bad I am. And we talk about what is going on around us. And something that has continued to come up, no matter what part of the country we come from, is this idea that we've all been struck by how anxiety has taken hold of our society and the people in the churches we serve in epidemic proportions. Because there's no question this season has added to our anxiety level. And I don't really need to talk about the what, right? Everybody know what the what is on the anxiety? We all know what it is, right? We know what we are anxious about. It's been talked about so much over the past year that, can we just be honest with an amen? We're tired of hearing about it, right? Amen? We're tired of hearing about it. Instead, what we need to talk about is the how. How do we overcome this anxiety in our lives? So I've been reading and studying, preparing. I had last week off, as a lot of you know, and speaking to a few pastor friends of mine these past few months. And I just have to clear some things up. I'm really indebted to my friend Drew Sherman and author Max Lucado for this series that we're getting ready to spend the next 4 weeks on. Max has written a book titled Anxious for Nothing. I think some of you have read that. If you've read that, raise your hand. So a few of you have read that, maybe even done a study on that. I highly recommend this book, which contains hope and help. And all of that we're going to be looking at throughout the series. And of course, it's kind of the inspiration for this series. And along with that, I'm going to be sharing some thoughts from my friend Drew, who did a series like this in his church in Texas back in April. And let me just state the obvious. I believe this is one of the most important topics we could be dealing with right now. I also believe that God is going to help many of you throughout this series to write a new chapter in your life of anxiety, and hopefully you can title that new chapter in your life as Overcomer.
That's what the hope is. So let's begin here. Let's begin with some statistics for you and things. Anxiety is the number one health issue among women in America today. Anybody know that? It's also the number 2 health issue for men, only behind drugs and alcohol. Now, personally, I think it would probably be number 1 for men if we weren't so arrogant, Like if we didn't have a hard time admitting it, because let's be honest, guys, we're the guys who stand back and say, well, I don't worry about anything. I'm fine, right? Which is a total lie. The reality is we all get anxious. The latest statistics, even prior to COVID-19, say that 40 million adults, and the number is growing, admit to struggling with anxiety. Add to the fact that we spend more than $48 billion a year treating anxiety. And parents, let me tell you about your kids for a moment. 1 in 4 kids deal with anxiety. The average age of onset anxiety is 8. It's getting ready to drop to 6. If a parent deals with anxiety, kids are 7 times more likely to struggle with it. And if you have teenagers, you know that this demographic is seeing its sharpest rise in anxiety. In a recent study done by Pew Research that surveyed the top problems teenagers see among their peers, bullying, drug addiction, gangs, alcohol, or poverty were not at the top of the list. But 70% identified anxiety and depression as the number 1 problem they see among teenagers. Look at this, teenager problems. Anxiety and depression, 70%. Bullying, 55%. Drug addiction, 51%. Drinking alcohol, 45%. And poverty is at 40%. But it's not just students. Listen, our entire society, every age group, every demographic is wrestling with anxiety. In fact, guess what country research indicates is the most anxious nation in the world? It's not Italy. It's not. It's the U.S. It's the U.S. We win the gold medal for anxiety. And not only that, did you know that when people from developing countries come to the U.S. to live, studies show that their anxiety actually increases? How can that be? I mean, when you think about it, our nation, go with me on this, is arguably, right, the most prosperous and safest country in the world, right? Would you agree? Yeah. Our cars are safer than they ever have been. Medical care has never been as good as it is now. I mean, these days, parents wouldn't even think of letting their kids leave the house and ride their bike without wearing a helmet. Which raises this question, all right? Show of hands, a little audience participation if you're a visitor or whatever. How many of you grew up with parents who made you wear helmets? One who's, how old are you, 18, right? 18, so yeah. No one else raised their hands in here, right? Yeah, I mean, let's just go over a few things. My family growing up had cars that did not have seat belts. Anybody else? Yeah, I mean, no seat belts, right? Like my mom, we would go on a trip, and do you remember, I forget, I'm not a car guy, okay? But, the cars had the hump in the back, right? I don't know how they got rid of that hump, but, it had the hump in the back. She would take pillows and build up both sides of that hump and then lay me down in the back seat behind the back seats so my older brother, who's, the favorite, he could have the back seat all to himself. Don't tell my mom I said that, okay? But that's what would happen, right? Because, why? Babies, for us, for you, if you were a baby at that time, you didn't have a car seat. I actually asked my mom about it and asked her, hey, did I have a car seat? She said I had one car seat that would strap over the front seat, but that was about it. I can remember sitting on my dad's lap. Anybody else remember that, driving down the road? Yeah. How about this? Anybody in here ever ride in the back of their dad's truck? Yeah, right? You would what? You'd run out and jump in the back of your dad's truck, and you didn't sit down in the middle of it. You sat on the edge. You wanted to be the cool kid that sat on the edge, right? And then when your dad would slam on the brakes, you would slam up against the back of the window. You remember that, right? Right? And you just check with it. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm okay. Let's go. Keep going, Dad. Let's go. And you'd get back at it, right? You'd keep moving, right? That's what we did, right? It was fun, but it wasn't safe. Would you agree? We didn't have bottled water, okay? I'm sorry if you grew up with bottled water. We drank water out of a what? Garden hose, right? Best water in the world. I wish I could go to my home and bottle that water. Best water. Some of you are like, that's nasty. Bottled water was not a thing. I left the house. Now some of you parents are going to really be concerned here, but I left the house after Saturday morning cartoons, walked out, said bye to mom, and disappeared until supper. Anybody else do that? Yeah, no phone, no GPS tracker, nothing. I just knew I had to be home at dark, washed up and ready for supper, right? My dad had a trash barrel. Anybody have a trash barrel and burn trash growing up? Yeah, my dad had a trash barrel. When it was my time to burn the trash, I loved it. I'd go out, I'd put the trash in the barrel, and then you want to guess what I did? I got the can of gasoline, right? I mean, if you're going to burn trash, let's have some fun, right? So I'd put like the entire can of gasoline on the trash and stand back by like 2 feet, probably should have been 50 feet, and throw the match at it. We didn't have the lighters, thank God, because I'd have probably burnt my arm off. But you throw the match at it and go poof. It was cool, right? Dad'd be like, I just filled that gas tank. I don't know what happened, Dad. It's really cool, though. Right? I mean, you just did those type of things. A couple other things real quick. We would take, my dad was a bricklayer, and we would take 8-inch concrete block, and we would build up a ramp with an 8-foot board, and we'd ramp our bikes. Anybody do that? See how much you could jump and go. And then the last thing I want to bring up is we also played jarts. Does anybody remember jarts? Huh? Who played jarts as a kid? Yeah. All right, so if some of you are like, what are jarts, okay? Imagine cornhole with darts that could pierce your heart, okay? Seriously, you'd like 2 teams, 2 of us here, 2 over here, draw a circle in front of you, and you would throw these large darts about like this size with a spike about like that up in the air to fall in the circle. So it was kind of like cornhole, except these could kill you if they hit you. Like, it was really fun in the summertime when the sun was out, because like, where to go? Where, it was just one of those things, right? Really cool, all right? But that's something that we played. So don't get me wrong, it was a great way to grow up, looking back. But it probably wasn't all that safe. A matter of fact, if you think about it, living in the 70s and 80s weren't safe at all. But you know what? As I was writing all that and thinking about that as I was looking through it, I don't ever remember being anxious. I don't. How is it that we have less to be anxious about than the past, yet we are more anxious? Well, I'm not sure, but I have a few theories. First of all, whether you believe in God or not, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, couldn't we all just agree that maybe there's a correlation between attempting to remove God more and more from our country and lives and the undeniable spike in anxiety that we have? Additionally, I think there are a couple other big factors that we could look at. For one, we are less socially connected than ever. Now, I understand that we're living in that time where we're supposed to practice social distancing, right? That's what we're told to do. You're supposed to keep that 6 feet and cancel this and cancel that. And some people do and some people don't. And that's where we're at. But some of you have engaged in social distancing long before the pandemic ever arrived. In many ways, we've replaced relationships with technology. Listen to me. If you grew up in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, and please give me an amen here, we did life together on a daily basis, did we not? Did we not? We did. Amen, right? We did life together. You had to do life together. Today, what do? We sit around, we're glued to the TV, we stream Netflix or Amazon, and we play on our phones. That's what we do. And that decrease in real relationships drives an increase in anxiety, because God designed us to do life with others in community. You've heard me say that. If you've went here long enough at Union Christian Church, and you'll hear me say it all the time, we do life together at this church. So it's going against what God intended if we're not. Let me ask a question. Is it possible that you have underestimated your need for community? If you're at home watching right now, is it possible that you've underestimated your need for community now that it's been taken away from us, right? I mean, it's coming back some. It's great to see a nice crowd in here this morning. But is it possible that you've underestimated that need? Online church has worked really well. I'm thankful that we have online church, that we were able to do that, to get to where we are. I'm very thankful, and it's helped keep people connected in certain ways. But for a lot of us who are still at home online or for some of us that are in here that just maybe come to church every once in a while just to see what it looks like, and then we're going to go home, we're going to watch online again. I wonder if when you return to full-time in-house church, if it won't give you a new sense of appreciation for the community you've been missing. This is why you hear me all the time push you to do life with others here at Union Christian Church. Get involved. Find a place to serve. Be plugged in. Listen to me, church. Outside of salvation and baptism, plugging in with others, being involved with others is on the top scale of a successful spiritual life for you, okay? And not just your spiritual health, but for your emotional and your mental health. Okay? A second big factor in the rise of anxiety is we are more aware of what's going on around us and around the world. I know a lot of people that think that our world has more tragedy now more than ever, but the world doesn't really have more tragedy. It's just that we are more aware of it these days, right? Social media, let's just be honest, social media has given us access to all of the pitfalls of this very fallen world that we live in. Would you agree? All the studies show the more social media you engage in, the higher your levels of anxiety. Remember the teenagers, 70%? And what do teenagers spend most of their time doing? Another part of that is, listen, comparison drives anxiety, and it just escalates through social media. Church, nobody wins when we compare ourselves to others on social media, and it's seldom a fair comparison. I mean, we almost never actually know the person that we're comparing ourselves to. Or if we do, okay, just stop there for a minute. If we do know that person, it's like the highlights of their life. You know, it's like the vacation that they went on to Hawaii, or the trip, or the anniversary dinner, or the one time in 10 years they buy a new car or whatever. And we think that we're comparing ourselves to their reality every day, and it's not. But that's what we compare ourselves to. And it's not just comparison. The speed at which we receive bad news today often outpaces our ability to process it. We find out about wars and earthquakes and acts of terrorism a few minutes after they happen. If you grew up in the 40s and 50s, like some of our grandparents, our great-grandparents or whatever grew up in the 40s and 50s, they wouldn't have found out about tragedy until days or weeks later, maybe even months later. They wouldn't have found out. When do we find out when something happens? Now, right? Like right now. I mean, like if something tragic happened right now, all of you would start looking down at your phone because you would get a warning or alert or something like that. You'd look at your phone and we'd probably watch it live on our phones happening. That's how quick we do. And when you take God out of our lives and consider the fact that most folks are not connected relationally, are alone while comparing ourselves with others, and at the same time trying to process more and more tragedy, it is no wonder that we're all struggling with more and more anxiety. And it's why this series is so critical. Now, what is anxiety? Let's talk about that. Because fear and anxiety, okay, are related, but they are also very different. What does fear do? Okay, fear sees a threat and then reacts. So fear is this amazing gift. Fear is what keeps your kids from running out and playing in traffic, okay? Fear is what keeps your kids from reaching out and touching a hot stove and burning their hands. The problem is we fear the wrong things. I mean, think about it. I'll just give you an example. We fear spiders, but we don't fear diarrhea. Seriously, did you know more people die from diarrhea than they do spiders? You should fear a bean burrito from Taco Bell. That's what you should fear. Amen, right? Now, someone will go and get a bean burrito after church, though. Fear sees a threat and it reacts. But anxiety imagines a threat and can't move on. Anxiety is a meteor shower of what ifs. It's what if there's a snake in the woods? Well, then I'm never going in the woods again. Or what if, what if a plane crashes? Well, I'm never going to fly. Would anybody want to admit that they don't fly because they're worried about that? I mean, I actually know people who just absolutely, they would rather do anything but fly because they're afraid the plane is going to crash, okay? It's just this whole, what ifs that we go through in our life. For me personally, I'm going to stop here just for a minute before I go on. But for me personally, my wife's right over here in the corner, and she loves the ocean. So we go to the ocean every summer. She will never get in the ocean. She loves it. She'll walk out and get it to maybe here one time the entire week. But we go there every year, okay? That's a whole nother thing, sorry. I will go out in the ocean, wade out in the ocean, and at times I'll look around and it's up to my neck. Anybody ever done that, right? And then you start like looking around and what if a shark takes me right now? Like, it could happen, right? I mean, what if a shark comes up behind me? I'm thinking, like I've been out with my kids before and been like, what if a shark comes? Could I get Riley in between me and the shark before, that happens? I've asked that question. No, I wouldn't do that. But anxiety is a constant state of what ifs. What if I get sick? What if my kids get sick? What if the market crashes? What if I lose my marriage? What if there's a terrorist attack? What if I'm a bad parent? What if the kids' teeth are crooked? What if I don't have enough money to fix the kids' teeth that are crooked? What if, fill in the blank. Anxiety puts our minds and our bodies in a place of fight or flight, and they were not designed for that. You see, fear is temporary and it's good and then it moves on, but anxiety lingers. It stays. Have you ever had seasons where you can't sleep? Anyone? Like you wake up, tossing and turning between the hours of 1 and 4. Anybody ever done that? Like over and over again, and I've done it, I have. And that's called anxiety. And you wake up thinking and worrying about the hypotheticals and the theoreticals and what could happen here and what could happen there. And some of you are even having your anxiety go up because we're talking about it in church. And you know why your anxiety is going up? Because many of us who are Christians have been told that if you have anxiety, something is wrong with your faith. Like something is wrong with your love for Jesus. Jesus came to give peace. So if you have anxiety, something is wrong with you. Listen. Take a deep breath. Everybody right now. 1, 2, 3. Let it out. Don't miss what I'm about to say. If you have anxiety, listen, you are normal. If you have anxiety, you are human. We all deal with it. Here's maybe the most highlighted verse in the Bible, Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. Now, this is where we're going to camp out for this series, is in Philippians. So just to get you ready for that, if you want to go home and read it or whatever. But what's amazing here is from a prison cell, about ready to get his head chopped off, Paul writes these words I'm getting ready to read. Now, just think about the anxiety. You want to have anxiety? How many of you would have anxiety? Like you're waiting to get your head chopped off. I think I'm going to have just a little bit of anxiety, right, going on in my head. And here's what he writes. Do not be anxious about anything. Some translations say be anxious about nothing. And Paul, and right away we go, hey, Paul, that's pretty cool. Like, all right, you're telling me not to be less anxious, right? No, that's not what he said, right? It's like, if you would have told me to be less anxious, I could maybe make that work. But you're telling me I can't be anxious at all? That's impossible, right? I mean, that's what we start thinking about. Is that really what he meant? Well, not necessarily. He wasn't saying never be anxious about anything in your entire life. That's not what he means here. In the original language, this verse is written in the present and active tense, meaning to find yourself in a present and active day-to-day state of anxiousness. The command is not don't ever be anxious. The command is don't live in a perpetual state of anxiety day after day, week after week, month after month. You don't have to carry it forever. Okay? Max Lucado says this in his book. He says, the presence of anxiety is unavoidable, but the prison of anxiety is optional. And the good news, there is a way out of the prison. Even Jesus experienced temporary anxiety in his life. If you remember, it was in the Garden of Gethsemane where he sweat drops of blood in the midst of enormous anxiety over what was about to take place hours before. He would be crucified for the sins of the world. He had some anxiety about that. And all of us are going to experience anxiety, but what we're going to learn in this series, hopefully, what we're going to learn in this series is a way to live where you don't have to stay anxious. And let me add here, some anxiety, okay, because I don't want to take this away from some of you. I knew some teenagers when I was a youth pastor in North Carolina that really had severe anxiety. So some of you really suffer with severe anxiety. So if that's it and you require professional help, please go get professional help. If it's counseling or therapy, whatever it is, listen to me, there is no shame in that. There's no shame in that. Additionally, God gave us doctors and he gave us medicine for certain scenarios in our lives. And sometimes our brain gets sick just as the rest of our body gets sick. So if you need help, come talk to one of the staff, come talk to one of the leaders in the church, and we will find you the proper help that you need for anxiety. But can we also admit that anxiety is not just a physical issue, but often it's deeply spiritual? Deeply spiritual. So what we're going to do here is for the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at 5 verses that Paul wrote from prison in Rome that give us a blueprint from God on how to move from anxiety to peace and from anxiety to calm. So each week we'll take a section of these verses and break it down. And with the remaining time today, what I want to do is I just want to focus on the very first thing God tells us to do to deal with anxiety, okay? So if you get to the end of today and you're like, man, he didn't do anything for my anxiety. He didn't make me feel any better. He didn't do anything about it. Hold on, okay? This is just the beginning, all right? Because here's the challenge. You've got to be here for the whole series, so you should be very anxious about missing any week of the series on anxiety. Okay? I'm pretty good today, aren't I? That's 2 for 2. So I want to read all 5 verses of this text, and we'll be unpacking, and then we'll focus on the first verse. The Apostle Paul from prison. Again, we just got to take just a moment, right, just to recognize that he's in prison. He's getting ready to die. It just amazes me what he writes here in Philippians to the church, why he's in prison. So here's what he says. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. So today, I want to focus on those first 2 verses where Paul begins with this. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. So when you read that right off the bat, if you have anxiety, you got to be like, are you kidding me, Paul? Seriously, that's what you want me to do? Like you just want me to jump around and celebrate after all these things that are going on in my life? That's what you expect me to do? I might lose my job, and you want me to be excited about that? My marriage is falling apart or crumbling, and you expect me to just go, woohoo, let's go. I'm ready for this. Or I could get sick, right? Or something like that, and I'm just supposed to rejoice in that? It's like, Paul, I love you. Man, one of the best writers in the New Testament. What a great guy, but you're making no sense right here. Like absolutely no sense. Here's what we're missing. Paul is not telling us to rejoice in our worries, but he tells us to rejoice in what? He tells us to rejoice in the Lord. And that's different, church. Let your gentleness be evident to all, he goes on to say. The Lord is near. Paul is reminding us that belief precedes behavior. If anxiety is out of control, go back to what you believe about God, because what you believe and celebrate specifically about God determines how you behave and deal with anxiety. How many of you parents can remember the first time you took your child to a pool or lake and they ran up to the side, right? And what do? They're on the dock, right? And you're trying to get them to jump in the water for the first time, but they do nothing, right? You been there? Anybody been there? What? Right? They get to the edge, they don't do it. Why? Because they think they're going to die. That's my guess. They think they're going to die. Now, some of you in here are cold-blooded parents. You picked your kid up and just threw him in. Some of you are going, yep, that's me, right? And that's why they suffer from anxiety, okay? Now, some of you could have been like me, right? You got in the water as a dad. Dads, you can go with me on this. We got in the water as dads, and they're setting us aside, and we get in a good place. We hold our hands up, and we look at them, and we say, jump. Daddy will what? Daddy will catch you, right? And some of us started out nice, right? Like, come on, honey, daddy will catch you, I promise. But then they hesitate, right? And after a while, we get a little frustrated and we're like, you better jump right now or we're going back to the room right now, right? You've been there, right? Have you ever thought about why you got so frustrated in that moment? We know how much, here's why, we know how much we love our kids, but basically their behavior to us says this: I don't believe you. Belief precedes behavior. And in the same way, we do that with God. And again, this isn't everything to this whole series. It's just the intro to week number 1 of the series. But the same is true of our anxiety and beliefs about God. You see, the first thing we must do to change our response to anxiety is to celebrate what's true about God. And in these 2 verses we're going to look at today, Paul gives us 2 things that we need to celebrate and believe about God to help us begin to fight against the anxiety in our lives. Because let's face it, let's just be honest, we all would love to live in peace, amen? Okay, first, peace is found inside the boundaries of trusting in God's goodness and his control. Now, I was trying to figure out what a good example of this would be. Like, what kind of, analogy or whatever could I give you? So I had to make a few phone calls and talk to a few different people to give me a good illustration. And what we came up with, or what I came up with to share, is the invisible fence. Anybody have an invisible fence at home for their dogs? If you don't know what I'm talking about, they put like underground wires in and they keep their dogs in the yard or whatever. So a friend of mine, he was telling me about some buddies that decided they were going to test how the fence worked. So please, online here and in the room, do not try this at home. This is a disclaimer. Don't say, well, Pastor Todd said it was really cool. Do not try this at home. So what happened is, in a group of friends, one of the friends, I don't know how you volunteer for this, put the collar around his neck, right, and decided to step outside the fence. And the way it was explained to me was, as soon as he stepped outside the fence, he went, poof, right? He just fell to the ground. And he had to crawl back into the fence for the shock to go away. Well, the same thing can happen to us when we get outside the boundaries of God's goodness and control. Anxiety is like that shock to the system that can knock us down and keep us down. It's like getting outside the invisible fence. But the good news is it doesn't have to be that way. Paul gives us the how on this. The first thing Paul says is rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice, right? You see, there are many names for God that Paul could have used here, but he chooses to use Lord, which means the one who is in charge, right? So the one who is in control. So I think what Paul is suggesting here is that as followers of Christ, we should rejoice in the fact that God is in control. Amen? He's the one who is in charge, and we need to focus on that. And there's a direct link between control and anxiety. There is a very interesting study recorded during World War II. This study found that combat soldiers could only handle about 60 days of continuous combat before anxiety overwhelmed them. Now, why? Because they felt completely out of control. They never knew when a bullet would take them out. Just didn't. By contrast, fighter pilots, who had a much higher chance of dying, it was like 50% higher, killed in action. It could happen, right? They did not have the same anxiety. Why? Why do you think? They had the perception of being in control because their hands were on the controls. Now, were they really in control? No. Right? They had less control, actually, but here's the truth. Anxiety increases as perceived control decreases. The less control we believe we have, the more more anxious we become. So should we try and control everything? Should we? Like, should we never get on a plane? Should we never go outdoors? Should we mount cameras in our kids' cars? Should we follow their locations everywhere? Should we never take a risk? No, we shouldn't. And before we go any further than that, I said this in first service, and I'll say it real quick here in second service. Some of you parents, I want you to think about what you were doing when you were 16, 17, and 18, and then ask yourself why you would want to put a tracker on your kids' phones and know where they are at 16, 17, and 18. They've got to be able to make mistakes just like we did, right? I know some parents, they put a tracker on their kid, and they can tell you where they are right now exactly every second of every day. And I think, I don't want my parents to know where I was when I was set. Any of you? Raise your hand. Would you want? Yeah, one person, okay. But, yeah, there's always one, right, you know? But really, let your kids just be. It'll be okay. We all learn from our mistakes, right? We shouldn't want to control everything. It doesn't work that way. Some of the world's biggest control freaks are honestly some of the most anxious people. Some of you need to hear me say this, so listen up, okay? Everyone listening? If you know someone who's a real control freak, nudge them up and wake them up, okay, if they fell asleep, all right? You need to hear this. You cannot control everything, so stop trying and just move on. You can't. And I am a semi-control person. If you know me, I like to control stuff. But you can't control everything. Control will not solve your anxiety problem, but the Bible has a better way. Listen to the words from the prophet Isaiah in chapter 26. It says, "You will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you, all whose thoughts are fixed on you." When we fix our thoughts on who God is and what he promises, that is where we find peace, church. And that's why Paul says it to us twice, rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice, right? What Paul knew and what we have to understand is what you are anxious about the most often reveals where you trust God the least. So if you want to overcome the anxiety in your life, it starts by releasing control and giving it over to God. Next, we don't just recognize God's in control. We have to celebrate and rejoice in God's goodness. Let's look at verse 5 again. What's it say? It says, "Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is what? He's near." All right, so I know we just celebrated Christmas, but if it's okay, I want to go back to my Christmas message that I shared on Christmas Eve. And if you weren't here as a visitor, you won't be lost, I promise. But I'm just going to go back to a little bit that I said at Christmas. All right, the Christmas season is where we celebrate that God came near in the form of Jesus. Amen? And the name Emmanuel means what? It means God with us. He's with you. He's never left you, even for a moment. And you know, as I look back over my life, I'm astounded and just moved at all the different times that God has been with me throughout my life. I'm only going to share a few of them because a lot of the people who've attended here are bored hearing about my details of my life. But when I was getting ready to go into junior high, my red granny died. I called her a red granny because she wore a red apron and lived in a red brick house. Her and I had just that kind of relationship, you know, that you have with your grandparents. She was my great-grandma, and I loved her to death, and I'd spend the night with her every night I possibly could, and she would go out and swing in her swing as I pretended like I knew how to do tricks on my dirt bike. More or less, I would skin up my knees, and then she would take me inside, and she would spray this stuff on my knee and tell me it wasn't going to hurt. It was like acid on my knee, you know. I was like, "Grandma, that hurts." And no, you blowing on it doesn't make it feel better, okay? But when she passed, God was with me, and I'm thankful he was. Okay, when I met an 18-year-old young, beautiful girl, seriously, right out of high school, and we went on our very first date, and God was with me on that. He was with me. And who knew, besides God, in that moment, that one day, folks, short of a year from our first date, that we would be married. And that in June of this next year, we'll celebrate 27 years. I can tell you, as children, I was 22, she was 19 when we got married, that God has been with us in 27 years. He's been with us. When I was 33 years old, God called me in the ministry. I was a union bricklayer. He called me into the ministry. I made every excuse why not to do it. But at that moment, I started my journey, which was going back and getting my degree. I started my journey on getting my education and going into full-time ministry, which I did 3 years later. I just think about that through life of the times that I can tell you that God was with me every step of the way, even in those moments, those crucial moments when I really, really wanted to give up. Last year I finished my grad school, and man, I tell you, in the last semester I had so much work to do. I didn't know what I was doing, and I wanted to give up. I had 4 or 5 conversations with my wife about just giving up, but God was with me. And many of you, this is why I point all this out, many of you really struggle to believe that God is with you. You really struggle to believe that even in your darkest days, God can still work something good out in your life. But that is the story over and over and over again in Scripture. Joseph looks at his brothers. Think about Joseph's life for a minute before we go further. Think about his life. Anything you know about Joseph, right? I mean, he's sold into slavery by his brothers. He has this horrible life, you know. He thinks he finally finds a home in Potiphar's place, and then that gets messed up, and he ends back up in prison, and all this happens. Then what happens? He ends up being like, man, he's like second in command in Egypt, right? All this is going on, all this bad stuff. You talk about somebody who could have had anxiety. He could have had anxiety, but we see him at the end of his story saying, you intended. He's talking to his brothers who tried to do everything to ruin his life. And he says, you intended to harm me, but God intended it to be good. You see, Jesus is the perfect example too. The day he died looked like the darkest, most hopeless day in history. Hope was dead. But 3 days later, God not only made the story good for Jesus, but for all of us through his resurrection. And that's not just the story of Scripture. My guess is if you just look at your own life, many of you right now with some time and maybe some perspective of your life could look back on your life and see that in your darkest days, God was with you. He was there. He had your back, and that he has a better track record of working good in your life than you sometimes give him credit for, because he's with you, church. Craig Rochelle says this. He says, it takes death to have a resurrection. It takes pain to have progress. It takes a hurt to have a healing. It takes a struggle to have a story worth telling. And it takes a trial to have a testimony. When I look back on my life, there has been more dark hours. No doubt about it. Just be honest, I have dealt with deep anxiety in my life. More than you could imagine. And I'm the guy that would tell you I don't have anxiety. I've had sleepless nights where I'll wake up in the middle of the night and I'll start asking that question, what if? What if? What if? But God, in his mercy, has shown me that peace is found inside the boundaries of trusting in God's goodness and his control. You see, when you feel anxious, it could be for a number of reasons. But Paul tells us the first thing you need to do is celebrate who God is. Then you celebrate his goodness, and that ultimately he is in control. Amen? Rejoice in the Lord, who's in control. Why? Because God is near. Listen, if you believe God is good but not in control, you're always going to try to take control, okay? If you believe God is in control but not good, then you're always going to distrust God. And today, the real challenge for each of you in this room right now is, will we trust that he's both good and in control? Will you do that? Will you commit to know the beginning of this series that God is good and that God is control? Can you fully, let me ask you this, can you fully control your job? Like if you're going to lose it or not? Can you do that? Anybody in here have just a guaranteed job, 100%, no way you'll ever get fired? We can't control that. Even if you're the hardest worker, even if you put in multiple hours, even if you're doing everything and giving everything, you can't control the economy. You can't control if a company has to have layoffs, right? Or stays in business or whatever. You can't control that, but you can trust. Listen to me. You can trust that God's in control. And even if you lose your job, he has something good prepared for you. That's his promise. Can you control that you'll never have a financial hiccup? Anybody? Anybody control that? I wish, right? Don't you wish? No amount of money guarantees that you'll never have a financial hiccup. So what do? You live below your means, you honor God with the tithe, and trust his goodness to meet your needs. Amen? Can you control your spouse? Some of you'd like to think you can, right? Or you would. I mean, some of you'd like to think. I'm going to pick on you ladies. Let me ask you, can you control your husband? The answer is no. The more you try to control your husband, the more he's going to rebel. So you can't. But what if you said this? What if you went home and said, you know what, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to turn control of him over to God. And then, God, you do a good work in him. Please do a good work in him. Because here's the deal. God cares more about your marriage than you do. Parents, listen up. Can you control and protect your kids from all the dangers of the world? No, I mean, unless you're going to wrap them up in bubble wrap and stuff them in a room. And even at that, your house might burn down one day, right? I have 3 kids. I have a 23-year-old daughter that lives in Las Vegas. I mean, she's all the way on the other side of the country. You don't think that sometimes my wife and I worry about her? We see her like twice a year. And then we have a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old. We have 2 sons. I mean, we worry about them, yes, but we know that we cannot protect them from all the dangers in the world. We can't. But what we need to remember is God in heaven, he loves our kids more, like 1,000 times more than you're ever going to love your kid. And I know that's hard to hear. So what you can say is you can say, listen, and here's the deal, all right? I said it in first service. I got to say it here because I knew a pastor over at First Christian Church. That's where I grew up. His name's Greg Comp, and I'll never forget. I can't quote his exact words, but I remember the general precept of what he was saying. And his daughter, when she got married, was moving to Germany to be a missionary, and she was young, right? And he said the hardest thing he had to do as a parent was to pray to God and release his child into God's hands. So if you're a parent and you have kids, one day you're going to have to pray that prayer and give God your kids back. And trust that he knows what he's doing, and trust that he will take care of them, and trust that he'll be there with them as he has with you. And that should be the evidence to look back on your life and see where God has been in your life, where God has come through for you in your life. Then you should realize he'll do the same for your child. And that's what this is all about, this whole series, right? Getting rid of the anxiety and realizing God is good. Amen? He's in control. He knows what's going on right now. He knows when COVID will end. He knows what the country will look like in 3 months or 4 months or 8 months or a year. He knows when you'll get another job. He knows when you'll be healed. He knows when you're going to die. He knows all of that. See, this is just the first thing. This is just the icing on the cake of the series that Paul is telling us. But what he's saying we need to position ourselves squarely inside the boundaries of God's goodness and God's control. And we need to celebrate who he is. You want a challenge to go home? Because my prayer is that over this whole course of this series is that you'll release all of your anxiety to God and let him carry that burden. Do you want a simple challenge? Just go home, get out a piece of paper and a pencil, and write down 10 things, 10 times that God has been there for you, 10 times that he never left your side, 10 times, just 10. I bet you can do it fairly quickly. You want to really challenge yourself, try to make that 10 into 25 or 50 and start thinking through your life of where God has shown up and been there. Because God is good and God is control, church. He's in control and he's good and he loves you, and we need to trust that and we need to celebrate that. And that's my prayer for each of you. Maybe we take time as we close out here in prayer to remember, as we remember the sacrifice that Christ made on that cross. As we remember the blood shed. We remember the body broken. As we listen to the words the band sings, as we take time to just spend some time between God and I. Let's pray. Father God, we love you and we just thank you for your goodness. We thank you that you're in control. And Father, we thank you for the challenge you've put before us in this first sermon of this series. Thank you, Lord. Father, I pray for everyone in the room right now. I just pray, Lord, that they go home and that they realize how good you are and how in control you are, and that they celebrate that with not only themselves but with their families. And they realize that you are ultimately in control of everything, and it does us no good to live with a life of anxiety all the time, worrying. We can't do anything about it. So may we release that to you, Father. We love you, Jesus. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Peace, bring it all to peace. The storm surrounding me, let it break. At your name, still, call the sea to still, the rage in me to still every wave. At your name, Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus. Breathe, call these bones to live, call these lungs to sing once again. I will praise, breathe, call these bones to live, call these lungs to sing once again. I will praise Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, 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 you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, you silence fear. Jesus, Jesus, you make the darkness tremble. Jesus, Jesus, oh, your name is a light that the shadows can't deny, and your name cannot be overcome. Your name is a light forever lifted high, and your name cannot be Bring it all to peace. The storm
and wonderful you are. In my darkest night, you brighten up the skies. A song will rise. I will sing a song. God of heaven, come down, heaven, come down. Just to know that you are near is enough. God of heaven, come down, heaven, come down. All things right, and I can start again. Creator God, calling me your friend. Sing praise, my soul, to the maker of the skies. A song will rise. I will sing a song of hope, sing along. God of heaven, come down, heaven, come down. Just to know that you are near is enough. God of heaven, come down, heaven, come down. Oh, sing a song of hope, sing along. God of heaven, come down, heaven, come down. Just to know that you are near is enough. God of heaven, come down, heaven, come down. Hallelujah, sing. Hallelujah, sing. Whoa, sing. Sing a song of hope, sing along. God of heaven, come down, heaven, come down. Just to know that you are near is enough. God of heaven, come down.